Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe so I can tell more interesting stories. Now let's get started. I've never been one for sitting still. Ever since I was a boy, I had this itch in my bones, an itch to move, to explore, to go where maps end and mystery begins. So when the idea struck me to cross the entire Antarctic continent, yes, the whole thing, I didn't think that's impossible. I thought that sounds fun. Dangerous, sure. Cold, obviously. But impossible? Not quite. We called it the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. Rolls off the tongue like royalty, doesn't it? I even handpicked a ship. The Endurance, a fine Norwegian-built vessel with a reinforced hull made for smashing through ice like a polite sledgehammer. Our goal, sail to the Weddell Sea land on the coast of Antarctica, and then walk, yes walk, across 800 miles of frozen wasteland until we reached the Ross Sea on the other side. Casual. I won't pretend it was easy gathering a crew. Not because no one wanted to go, quite the opposite. When I posted the recruitment notice, over 5,000 men applied. My ad simply read, men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger. Safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. Turns out, safe return doubtful was oddly appealing in 1914. I selected 27 men for the journey. Scientists, seamen, a photographer, a carpenter, even a stowaway teenager who thought he could sneak aboard unnoticed. Spoiler, he was found and put to work scrubbing the deck. Tough crowd. We set sail from England in August 1914, just as World War I erupted. I offered to cancel the trip and serve the war effort, but the Admiralty told me, proceed. Apparently, even in wartime, someone crossing the South Pole still sounded like a jolly good idea. By the time we reached the Southern Ocean, the real adventure began. I remember the first day we saw our first ice floes floating like cracked porcelain across the sea. The temperature dropped, the wind sharpened, and the horizon turned from blue to white, like the sky forgot how to be warm. Here's a historical fact to set the stage. Antarctica is the coldest, driest, and windiest continent on Earth. Scientists have recorded temperatures as low as 128.6 degrees. That's the kind of cold where your breath freezes midair and then judges you. Now, about the bizarre. Did you know we brought a gramophone and a stack of banjo records on board? That's right. Nothing boosts morale like plucking. It's a long way to Tipperary, while you drift near icebergs taller than Westminster Abbey. We named our ship Endurance, because within weeks of entering the Weddell Sea, she was doing exactly that. The pack ice started closing in. It wasn't a dramatic crunch at first, more like a slow creeping hug from a continent that doesn't know its own strength. We kept sailing, dodging floes, ramming through thin spots. But we knew it was only a matter of time before the ice made its move. One morning, I walked out on deck and felt the stillness. Not peace, a warning. No wind, no motion. Just ice all around us, like we were caught in the eye of a frozen storm that hadn't even started yet. Historians still debate whether we should have turned back then, whether we could have, whether pride or poor timing sealed our fate. But I know this much: we weren't trapped yet, and honestly, we still believed we could make it, at least for the moment. We ate well. We played cards. We danced on the deck with frozen boots. We made jokes about frostbitten toes and sang off-key sea shanties because the danger wasn't at our throats yet. It was still cracking slowly beneath our feet. The day that ice truly closed in, it didn't roar like in the movies. No giant crack splitting the horizon. No dramatic screams. It was more like slow thunder, like bones grinding under pressure. You'd hear these distant moans and groans, and the hull would creak, just a little more than usual, like it was whispering, boss, we might have a problem. By late January 1910, Antarctica. We were stuck, properly stuck. The Endurance wasn't going anywhere. Imagine parking your car in wet cement and watching the sun go down. That was us, surrounded on all sides by solid pack ice stretching as far as the eye could see. The sea long gone. We were now residents of a floating, freezing prison. Now, just for perspective, here's your historical fact. The Weddell sea pack ice is among the most unpredictable and dense in the world. It's been known to trap ships for years, plural. Ships with better luck than ours. Fun, right? We kept hoping for a thaw, hoping the ice would crack just enough to let us wiggle free. But Antarctica doesn't negotiate. Every day, the pressure built, and every day, the Endurance groaned a little louder. You could hear her ribs flexing under the weight, like she was holding her breath, and she couldn't hold it forever. Still, we didn't panic. That's not what British explorers do after all. We doubled down on our routines, trained the dogs, maintained watches, played the banjo. We even held races across the ice and staged a makeshift Antarctic theater. I once wore a wig made from unraveled rope and performed Shakespeare. My Macbeth was apparently unforgettable and mostly unintelligible. Here's the bizarre detail. For today, we celebrated Midwinter's Day, June 22nd in the Southern Hemisphere, with full decorations, paper hats, and a 7-course meal. That's right, trapped on an ice floe, eating penguin stew and pretending it was Christmas. If that's not optimism, I don't know what is. But by October, the game changed. The pressure beneath us wasn't playful anymore. The ice began twisting the Endurance's hull like it was wringing out a sponge. One day I was writing in my journal when I felt a deep shudder beneath my boots. The entire ship shifted, tilted, like it had tripped over something enormous. Then came the cracking, loud, splintering, sharp enough to stop conversation mid-sentence. We ran on deck. The bow had buckled. A jagged ridge of ice had pierced her side like a dagger. Water rushed in. We tried everything. Pumps patching prayers, but the Endurance was dying. Slowly, gracelessly. And there was no saving her. I stood in the snow, watching her collapse ribs, exposed deck-sagging masts, twisted like broken fingers. She'd carried us farther than any ship had a right to. But Antarctica doesn't care about effort. She went down with a sigh, and suddenly, we weren't explorers anymore. We were survivors. Historians still debate whether we should have tried marching across the ice earlier before the ship broke. Maybe. But hindsight's always warmer than reality, and reality was -20 and dropping. We salvaged what we could: sledges, lifeboats, rifles, canned meat, and the all-important banjo. Yes, I saved the banjo. Shackleton's orders, vital morale equipment, I said. Some men groaned, but later they thanked me. We moved our supplies onto the ice and made camp. Tents flapping in the wind, dogs barking at distant creeks, and above us, nothing but pale, ghostly sky. You know what's strange? There was a kind of peace to it. Everything had gone wrong, and somehow that freed us. No more pretending, no more hoping for the sea to open, just ice. And us. And the long walk ahead. We weren't done, not by a long shot. After the Endurance sank, the ice became our world, flat, shifting, and indifferent. We weren't stranded on land or adrift at sea. We were somewhere in between, camping on a frozen jigsaw puzzle that moved under our feet. It was like trying to live on a conveyor belt that occasionally cracked and tried to eat you. We called our new home Ocean Camp, which was optimistic, since there was absolutely no ocean visible, just an endless desert of snow. We pitched our tents and dug into our supplies, hoping this temporary situation would resolve itself. It didn't. Let me give you a historical fact here. Antarctica has no permanent human population. Not one city. Not even a proper village. Just scientific bases and a few very cold penguins who definitely do not offer hospitality. The continent is essentially one big do not enter sign from Mother Nature. We set up a schedule rations, watches, dog sled routines, ice patrol. The thing with living on ice is that you're never really on anything. It's always shifting, cracking, groaning. One night, I woke to the sound of a crack racing under my sleeping bag. It felt like a lightning bolt beneath my spine. I leapt up, looked around, and saw a fissure opening between our tents. Yeah, we moved camp that morning. We drifted for weeks. The ice carried us slowly north, a journey with no steering wheel, like hitchhiking on a glacier. We tried marching a few times, hauling the lifeboats and supplies, but the ice was too broken, the terrain too treacherous. 1 mile would take hours. Dogs sank. Men collapsed. Progress laughable. So we stopped walking and waited and floated. We ate seal and penguin. Tasted like overcooked, fish-flavored rubber. But hey, it was hot and full of fat. The chef orderlies once told me, "This stew is either improving or I'm going mad." To which I replied, "Why not both?" Here's today's bizarre detail. One of the dogs gave birth. 9 puppies born in the middle of a blizzard. We named them things like Nelson Mill and Swindle. The momentary joy was real. Puppies in Antarctica. But deep down, we knew they wouldn't last. That reality would come calling. By March 1916, the ice finally gave us an opening. It wasn't a door. It was more like the ice sneezed and a crack appeared. It was time. We packed the 3 lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills. Picture loading a moving truck during a hurricane with frostbite. We had no idea where the ice would break next or when. Historians still debate whether we left too soon or too late. But I say this, you don't get perfect windows in Antarctica. You get slivers, moments, and you move or you die. Launching the boats was chaos. The floe cracked beneath us as we heaved and dragged the crafts into frigid water. We scrambled aboard 28 souls in 3 tiny lifeboats surrounded by slush wind and fog. From that moment, the ice was no longer our floor. It was our enemy. The Weddell Sea greeted us like a drunk boxer, unsteady, violent, and very wet. The waves didn't just toss us, they punched us. Icebergs drifted like silent assassins, impossible to spot in the gray fog, until they were kissing your boat's side. Water froze in the bottom of the boats. Hands froze to the oars. We were soaked, freezing, sleep-deprived, and delirious. One night, the wind turned and the temperature plummeted. Everything was soaked. Our sleeping bags became icy coffins. I woke with a beard full of icicles and a man whispering, "Sir, I think I've frozen to my trousers." That was Frank Wilde. He said it completely deadpan. I looked at him and replied, "Better trousers than dignity." We both laughed for 5 full seconds, then stopped when our lips started to crack. Bizarrely, the lifeboats floated for 7 days in that hellish, stormy sea before we spotted it land. Elephant Island, a jagged slab of rock covered in ice and penguins. It wasn't exactly beachfront property, but it was solid. It was still. It was something we hadn't touched in nearly 500 days. We rode like madmen, and when we hit the beach, every man collapsed, gripping the frozen sand like it was gold. We weren't saved, but for the first time, we were no longer adrift. And that made all the difference. Elephant Island. Sounds exotic, right? You're probably picturing something with palm trees, a tiki bar, maybe an actual elephant or two. Yeah, no. Elephant Island is a wind-blasted rock off the coast of Antarctica, named not for elephants, but for the elephant seals that occasionally flop around on its shores like grumpy sea sausages. Still, after 497 days on ice and sea setting foot on solid land, again, felt like being reborn. Men wept. One man kissed the dirt. Another, Tom Crean, ate a handful of it just to say he'd tasted land. Needs salt, he muttered. We were dirty, bearded, frostbitten shadows of our former selves. But we were alive. We had land under our boots. Historical fact. Time. Elephant Island is completely uninhabited, and its weather is so foul that even penguins give it side-eye. There's no natural shelter, no trees, just jagged rock, freezing rain, and the constant sound of waves threatening to reclaim what little dry space there was. We set up camp under the upturned lifeboats and named the spot Point Wild after Frank Wild, our ever-sarcastic second-in-command. The man once described our camp as a beachfront resort with a touch of despair. I can't argue with that, but jokes aside, we had a major problem. No one knew we were there. Elephant Island wasn't on any ship's route. No passing vessels. No radios. No helpful penguins with flare guns. If we wanted a rescue, someone had to go get it. Guess who got volunteered? Yep, me. Here's where the story splits. Half the men stayed behind building shelters out of ice and hope, while I took a crew of 5 and prepped the James Caird, the strongest of our lifeboats, for the most dangerous gamble of all, an 800-mile voyage across the stormiest sea on Earth to South Georgia Island. The boat, just over 20 feet long. Open top. Makeshift sail. Reinforced with scrap wood and canvas. Imagine trying to sail a paper cup across the Atlantic during hurricane season. Historians still debate whether I should have taken more men, less gear, or waited for better weather. But the clock was ticking. Supplies were vanishing. Morale was cracking like sea ice. There was no time. We packed food for 4 weeks. Water casks, a sextant, blankets, a little brandy, and a cookpot, because no one likes to starve without stew. I stood on the beach that morning, wind screaming in my ears, and looked at Frank Wild. If we don't return, I said, wait as long as you can. How long is that? He asked. Just wait. And then we pushed off. 6 men, 1 boat, 800 miles of Southern Ocean, and exactly 0 backup plans. The first night we nearly capsized. The second we froze into a layer of ice so thick we had to chip ourselves out with a hammer. By the 4th day, the waves were 30 feet tall. They didn't just hit us, they swallowed us. Gray walls of water, lifting our tiny craft like it was a child's toy, tossing us sideways, then slamming us down hard enough to rattle our bones. Here's your bizarre fact. The Southern Ocean's circumpolar current circles the globe, uninterrupted by land, creating some of the most violent seas on the planet. That's what we sailed into, on purpose. With a boat that, I kid you not, still had a leaky floorboard patched with chewing gum. We bailed constantly, ate sparingly, slept in rotations curled into balls like frozen shrimp. Our clothes never dried, our lips cracked, our hands bled, and still we sailed. One morning, we spotted something in the distance. South Georgia. Mountains. Snow-capped. Glorious. We shouted, we hugged, we cried. But we'd only just begun the next part of the madness. Because, as luck would have it, we landed on the wrong side of the island. No settlements. No whaling stations. Just more mountains, jagged, icy, and uncharted. And we had to cross them, on foot. No map, no climbing gear, no tent. Just a carpenter's axe, a coil of rope, and boots, worn so thin you could hear the blisters praying. I turned to Worsley and Crean, the 2 strongest, and said, let's go for a walk. We began that climb, like three ghosts too stubborn to lie down. Me, Tom Crean, and Frank Worsley. We left the other three behind at the landing site with promises we'd come back with help. Or not at all. We had no climbing gear, no sleeping bags, and no idea what lay ahead. South Georgia's interior had never been crossed before by anyone. The island might as well have been the moon, for all the maps did for us. Here's a fun historical fact. South Georgia's mountains reach over 9,000 feet, and they're laced with glaciers, cliffs, and crevasses. We didn't know any of that. We just started walking, well, stumbling. The snow was deep, the wind unforgiving, and the ice cracked like brittle glass. Our boots were falling apart. We wrapped our feet in scraps of canvas and marched like men, being chased by ghosts, which in a way we were. The ghosts of 22 starving crewmates waiting back on Elephant Island. At one point, we descended a glacier by sliding down it, sitting on a rope like children at a snow park. "If this doesn't work," Worsley muttered, "I'd like to be cremated with rum." We laughed, then screamed all the way down. And then somehow we landed upright. We didn't stop for sleep. Couldn't. We were too cold. Stopping meant freezing. So we walked and walked for 36 hours straight, through sleet, fog, sheer white nothingness. Here's your bizarre fact. At one point we hallucinated. All three of us began to sense a fourth man walking alongside us. We never saw him, but we felt his presence. Creepy, right? Years later. T.S. Eliot wrote about it in The Wasteland, calling it the third who walks always beside you. Maybe the cold plays tricks. Maybe it was something else. Finally, after all the mountains, cliffs, and whispered ghosts, we heard something incredible. A whistle. A real honest-to-God whistle. We'd reached the Stromness whaling station. Civilization. Warmth. Men in uniforms. Coffee. Blankets. A chair that didn't shift beneath your feet. We must have looked like lunatics. Dirty, frostbitten, ragged. I walked up to the manager, who hadn't seen me in over a year, and said, "My name is Shackleton." He blinked. "We thought you were dead." "Not yet," I said. "But I'd love a bath." That was May 20th, 1916. Now the rescue wasn't over. Not even close. We still had to get the men off Elephant Island. Remember them? They were still huddled under boats, fighting the cold, eating seal blubber, and praying to whoever would listen. I tried to charter a rescue boat right away. Storms stopped us. Then war requisitions. Then broken engines. 4 separate attempts failed. Each time I got turned back, I could see Wild and the others in my mind, their faces hollowing by the day. But I never gave up. I couldn't. Historians still debate whether the Chilean Navy or private donors made the final rescue possible. What matters is this. On August 30th, 1916, over 4 months after I left, we finally reached Elephant Island, aboard the Yelcho, a small steam tug. I stood on the bow, with binoculars scanning the rocky shore. Then I saw them, all of them, every last one, alive. Frank Wild ran down the beach, waving his arms. "They're here," he shouted. "The boss is back." I can't describe what that moment felt like. Relief, pride, grief. All wrapped in wind and salt water and a single breath. We'd been gone over 22 months, crossed oceans, survived ice starvation, madness, and storms, and didn't lose a single man. That's not luck. That's something else entirely. After the rescue, the world greeted us like returning ghosts. People couldn't believe we were alive, especially not all of us. Reporters flooded me with questions. How did you keep them alive? What was the worst moment? What was your secret? I told them the truth. There was no secret. We just refused to die. Back in England, we barely had time to catch our breath. Remember, this was 1916. World War I was still raging. Most of us were sent straight back into military service. Some of the crew ended up in the trenches within weeks. Talk about whiplash one minute, you're fighting off frostbite the next, you're dodging artillery. Historical fact: only a small handful of the Endurance crew ever spoke in detail about what they'd endured. The trauma ran deep. Survival, it turns out, is loud at first, and then it goes quiet, burrowing deep inside. Now, here's your bizarre fact. Our photographer, Frank Hurley, managed to save dozens of glass photographic plates from the Endurance by diving into the freezing wreck to retrieve them. Today, those haunting images of our frozen ship drifting through ice are iconic visual ghosts of a ship that once dared the impossible. The public was fascinated, of course. The heroic age of Antarctic exploration, they called it. Bold men with frozen beards facing down nature. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt lucky and tired. Historians still debate whether my leadership style was brilliance or just pure stubbornness. I wasn't always warm. I wasn't always right. But I never gave up on my men. That much I can stand by. After the war, I tried to return to Antarctica. I know. You'd think, after all, that I'd take up gardening or something, but it gets in your blood. The ice, the silence, the infinite white. I organized one final expedition in 1921 aboard the ship Quest, but my heart quite literally couldn't take it. I died in South Georgia before we even reached the ice again. Heart attack. Quiet. Sudden. They buried me there. A simple stone cross, wind-carved and ocean-watched. There's something fitting about it, really. I always said South Georgia was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. People ask me what I remember most. Not the storms, not the hunger, not even the cold. It's the laughter. Frank Wilde making snide remarks about penguin soup. Tom Crean singing out of tune while the wind howled. The way we told jokes when our toes were black and falling off, because somehow that was easier than crying. You want to know what real courage is? It's laughing when you don't know if you'll live another day. It's cracking a joke with a frozen beard and a frostbitten hand because you don't want the guy next to you to give up. That's how we survived. That's how we endured. Not because of maps, not because of training, because we never stopped believing that we'd see the world again, even if the world had already given up on us. In the years since we returned, I've often found myself lying awake at night hearing the ice. It's not loud, not anymore, but there's this hum in my memory, like the groan of distant glaciers. Sometimes I think it's calling me back. Other times, I wonder if it ever really let me go. For the rest of the crew, life scattered like leaves after a storm. Some of the men returned to sea, unable to sleep under a roof anymore. Others stayed silent, their Antarctic memories packed away like old clothes that no longer fit. Frank Wilde, my right-hand man, tried to lead another expedition. He got close, but never quite captured what we'd had. It was like chasing the ghost of a storm. Here's your historical fact. After the Endurance expedition, not a single man from our crew wrote a full memoir immediately. Most gave their accounts in letters or interviews, but formal books came much later, if at all. Some say it was out of humility. Others say it was because some stories are too heavy to carry twice. There was a statue unveiled years later, bronze and grand and heroic. People gathered and clapped, talked of bravery and British resolve. I stood off to the side and thought about Worsley's cracked hands, about Blackborough's frostbitten toes, about ceiling fat that congealed in our beards, and the joke we told every time, at least it's warm. Bizarre fact of the day, our boots were so worn by the end of the journey, one crew member nailed raw penguin hide to the soles just to keep walking. He called them Antarctic loafers. I told him to patent the idea. He didn't. I don't regret going. Not one moment. Not even the hunger, or the frostbite, or that weird rash I got from sleeping too close to a seal. What I do regret is not writing the men's names more often. So let me do that now. Tom Crean, the Irish workhorse, who never once said I can't. Frank Worsley, our navigator, who found South Georgia with a sextant, a watch, and sheer willpower. Frank Wilde, the man who held the line when I left, who kept hope burning with nothing but grit. Blackborough, the stowaway turned hero, who lost his toes, but never his humor. Hurley the madman with a camera who documented our ghosts. And all the others, silent giants in frozen tents who never broke. Historians still debate what made the Endurance expedition legendary. Some say it's because we survived. Others say it's how we survived. But I think it's because we never stopped looking after each other. Not once. Not when the ship sank. Not when the food ran out. Not when the wind tried to peel the skin off our faces. We never gave up on one another. And that's rarer than any discovery in the polar ice. I'll end this part with a memory. One night on Elephant Island, just before I left, on the Caird, we sat around the campfire. The men were quiet, exhausted. I asked them what they'd do if they got home. Crean said, "Buy a pub and drink until someone drags me out." Worsley said, "Sleep indoors for a month." Hurley said, "Find the nearest darkroom and never come out." Wilde looked at me and said, "If we all make it back alive, I'll never complain about anything again." He didn't, and I think neither did I. When I close my eyes now, I don't see the hardships, we all had them. I see the faces around the fire, the inside jokes, the moments where we found something close to peace in the most frozen corners of Earth. If you've ever watched a man laugh while covered in blisters and holding half a biscuit, then you know what real joy looks like. After everything, people still ask me why we went. Why risk it? Why leave comfort behind? Let me try to explain. It's not about conquering nature. That's a myth. You can't conquer Antarctica any more than you can command the tide. You respect it. You survive it. You might even learn from it if it lets you. For me, it was about purpose. That feeling of standing on the edge of the world and knowing that you're a part of something bigger. Something that strips away every luxury, every excuse, every lie you've ever told yourself until all that's left is you and the people beside you. Here's a historical fact. In 1902, after my death, my wife Emily requested that I be buried in South Georgia. Not in England, not in London's polished cemeteries, but among the glaciers and seabirds at the edge of the world where I belonged. Today, my grave still sits there, facing the sea. One bizarre footnote: a wooden crate of McVitie's biscuits we packed for the journey somehow survived decades and was eventually found in pristine condition, still edible, according to some foolish museum staffer who dared a nibble. "Tastes like ambition and regret," he reportedly said. What about the rest of the crew? Some came home to families and quiet lives. Others fought and died in the war. A few tried more expeditions. But none of us were quite the same. You don't survive Antarctica and come back unchanged. Historians still debate what made our expedition different from the others: Scott's tragic failure, Amundsen's racing glory. Ours was neither a defeat nor a victory in the usual sense. We discovered no new land, planted no flags, claimed no treasure, but we brought everyone home, and in that we found something far rarer than glory. We found the measure of what humans can endure when led with courage, when bonded by trust, and when utterly, stupidly, relentlessly hopeful. You know what I miss the most? The silence, not the kind you get in a library or a forest, but the Antarctic kind. A silence so deep you can hear your thoughts echo, where the crunch of a boot on snow sounds like a thunderclap, where your breath fogs out and vanishes into forever. There's no audience there, no applause, just ice and sky and the space between heartbeats. The longer I lived, the more I realized that survival stories aren't about strength. Not really. They're about devotion to the people beside you, to the smallest chances, to the idea that you might still matter even when everything else has been stripped away. When I was younger, I wanted to be remembered as a trailblazer, an explorer, a name chiseled into history. But after the endurance, all I wanted was for people to remember that we didn't leave anyone behind, and that I never asked my men to do something I wouldn't do myself. That matters. Here's a historical truth. Shackleton's leadership style is now studied in business schools, military academies, and leadership seminars around the world. They talk about flexibility, emotional intelligence, crisis management. But what they miss is that I was just watching out for my crew. Like family, I didn't lead them from above. I walked next to them, ate the same scraps, froze in the same winds, told the same terrible jokes. I still claim credit for inventing seal stew with a hint of despair. Here's your bizarre fact. One crew member swore he saw a polar bear during the trip, which is impossible, of course. Polar bears live in the Arctic, not the Antarctic. But after weeks without sleep and nutrition, who's to say what's real and what's wishful hallucination? Personally, I think it was a particularly judgmental seagull. You know, I sometimes think the men didn't follow me because I was particularly brilliant or brave. I think they followed me because I believed in them, even when they didn't believe in themselves, especially then. I remember a moment just before launching the James Caird, when one of the younger sailors pulled me aside. "Sir," he said, "I don't think I can do this anymore." I looked at him and said, "You don't have to do it. We will." That's the difference. When you make someone feel like they're part of a we, you give them strength they didn't know they had. Historians still debate whether my expedition was a success since we didn't reach the South Pole or achieve our intended crossing. But in the hearts of those who study survival, it's become a case study in how to keep hope alive against impossible odds. And for me, that's worth more than any map or medal. You see, endurance wasn't just the name of our ship. It was a promise to endure the cold, the doubt, the waiting, and to come out the other side still human, still whole, still able to love, laugh, and lead, even after the ice tried to take it all. I'll never forget the last night on South Georgia. We were camped near the whaling station, and I stepped outside to breathe the air one last time. Above me, the southern sky stretched wide, glittering with stars that didn't belong to anyone. A blanket of silver stretched over a black sea. I thought about the men back on Elephant Island, about the younger me who once dreamed of charts and glory. And I whispered to the night, "You didn't beat us." Then I went back inside because morning was coming, and there were still men to save. It's strange looking back. All that ice, all that suffering, it somehow shaped the warmest memories I've ever held. They weren't warm in the literal sense. Of course, we spent most nights praying for a hint of heat, lighting damp matches like sacred rituals. But the warmth came from something deeper. We had each other. We didn't always agree. We bickered, snapped, groaned at the smell of seal meat cooking again. But when one man faltered, another lifted him. When one cried quietly at night, someone else cracked a joke so bad we'd all groan in unison. That's what survival really looks like, not a lone figure against a storm, but a chain of souls gripping each other tight so no one gets swept away. Here's your historical fact to finish. The Endurance was found in 2022, over a century after it sank, perfectly preserved in the icy depths of the Weddell Sea, as if the ship had been waiting in silence for the world to remember her. And when they found her, the name was still visible, endurance etched in gold across her bow, as proud and defiant as the day we left her behind. And the bizarre fact, scientists examining the wreck say it's so well preserved, it looks like it could sail again. Now, I don't know about you, but I think if someone did raise her from the deep, she'd be ready. Maybe creak a little, maybe sigh once, and then glide forward like nothing had happened, because that's what she did best endure. Historians still debate what made us succeed where others failed. Was it planning? Was it instinct? Was it luck? The answer is probably all of it. But if I had to choose just one word, I'd choose together. We endured because we stayed together. And that's the truth of it. People love to romanticize survival. They imagine it as triumph, like some slow-motion scene in a movie. But it's not like that. It's clumsy. It's cold. It's full of doubt. And you don't always know if you're winning until it's all behind you. But when you look back and see that everyone made it out, that's when you know it was worth it. So, if you've listened this far, maybe you're going through something. Maybe your own storm, your own kind of ice. If you are, just hold on to your crew. Tell bad jokes in the dark. Eat whatever stew life throws at you. And believe, really believe that you'll make it. Because the world's not done with you yet. And if we could do it, you can too. And now, as our story slips into the quiet, I want to leave you with one final breath. A breath like the kind we took on that cold Antarctic night, standing under a sky that stretched wider than any map, where the stars didn't just twinkle, they pulsed like heartbeats echoing in the heavens. The tale of the Endurance isn't just about one man or one ship. It's about all of us. It's about the parts of us that won't quit, even when every logical reason says we should. It's about loyalty that outlasts frostbite and humor that survives hunger. It's about choosing to go on, not because you're unafraid, but because someone beside you needs you to. So, when your own ice closes in, when your lifeboat seems too small, when the sea ahead looks endless, remember us. Remember the frozen laughter, the stubborn hope, the silence that didn't kill us, but instead revealed who we really were. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find something inside yourself that you didn't know was there. Something strong, something beautiful, something that endures. Thank you for walking with me through this snow-covered memory. I hope it settles softly in your mind and lingers just long enough to warm your next step. Take care of each other, stay curious, and wherever you are tonight, may your sky be clear and your crew close.